Yeah, so Derek Chisora was back in the ring. The last dance, which I guess now proves not to be the last and final dance, having made a shock U-turn. Derek Chisora, I guess, avenues to have a fight over in Africa. He didn't seem too interested in, also maybe the infrastructure and the social political climate wasn't right there, conducive for a big boxing match over in Africa. So it seems. Anyway, I'm not too well versed on that, but that seems to be what the whispers are as to that situation, which sees Derek Chisora off the back of a victory over Otto Wallin, who I mentioned here earlier in the Seconds Out live chat and conversation with Danny, that I thought Otto Wallin was going to win this fight. And it just seemed as soon as Derek Chisora was able to, and some of you Boxing Asylum listeners will have heard this from me yesterday, as soon as Derek Chisora was able to breach through Otto Wallin's range that he was trying to maintain with the jab and the footwork, as soon as that was breached and pretty easily breached, it meant that Derek Chisora was able to just get through to Otto Wallin. That came at the cost of some very accurate jabs and very accurate shots to the head, but not enough, and not with enough strength to hold off or make Chisora think twice about those marauds forward. And that meant that Otto's game was essentially out the window. He can't or didn't show that he could fight on the inside. That's Derek Chisora's wheelhouse, and that was Derek Chisora's game. So he just needs to repeat that for the rest of the rounds. And he did do that. Otto Wallin maybe winning one or two rounds at most. The shot that knocked him down, the first knockdown, was for a fighter of Otto's ability, I thought was really poor, really comical from Otto to stand in front of Derek with a long looping shot. That wasn't befitting of a fighter who had Tyson Fury in real crisis, and of a fighter who looked like he could cause fighters at the top level some problems. Someone who'd beaten Murat Gassiev on away soil, and Gassiev packs a punch as well. It just didn't seem like Otto really wanted it at the weekend, and that was a real shame to see that. And I think he's got to really assess where he stands in the heavyweight division. Some might point the finger and say that the knockout to Joshua has really put a dent in him, but I didn't see a fighter who was particularly. I don't think he was scared or apprehensive to do it, because he took Chisora's shots. He felt them. I think he felt Chisora's strongest shot and came forward. It's just whether the endeavor and ambition, the real devil was in him, like it was in that Fury fight. Maybe it was because it was a fight that didn't have much on the line. But then again, it was a form of eliminator. Maybe he just didn't like the style and didn't want Derek Chisora. Just found out that there wasn't that bit of dog in him, and he was out dogged on the night. A lot of questions falling Otto Wallin's way, but Derek Chisora is the winner, and he asked the questions of the fans in the ring afterwards in his monologue, I guess you'd call it. And he said to the fans, and I'll ask you guys as well in the chat as Danny's departed, waiting for him to come back. He said, "Do you want to see me fight Alexander Usyk in my 50th and final fight?" Big roar from the crowd. "Do you want to see me fight Anthony Joshua, my 50th and final?" Big roar from the crowd too. And then, "Do you want to see me fight Daniel Dubois in my final fight?" Bit of boos, bit of jeers. No one really that ruling out Daniel Dubois, although that seems to be the path going through the IBF route. So that leaves Joshua and Usyk, at least in Derek Chisora's mind, as to what the public wants. And Usyk, tough prospect, although Usyk credits him as giving him this a real tough test and the hardest shot he'd taken at heavyweight. And then Anthony Joshua, who's a friend of his and unlikely as to seeing them two square off. And my colleague Rady Rahim put that to him as whether he'd want to fight Anthony Joshua and potentially retire him. And he said no, he didn't want to do that. Some names that are out there at the moment, of course, the one that's been talked about a lot is the Dillian Whyte trilogy fight. And Dillian Whyte has said that he wants a trilogy, and that at the front of most people's minds are those two terrific fights between Whyte and Chisora. And that seems the most obvious choice to go down for the both of them. He ruled out Francis Ngannou as an option that didn't really interest him. It was mentioned on the Asylum yesterday as a name of intrigue that David Hay had apparently teased something was in the works for him, a potential boxing return in 2025. I'm not too sure about that, not heard much about that at all, or whether that's been kept in close-knit circles, but the prospect of David Hay returning to the ring to fight Derek Chisora doesn't appeal to me too much. And David Hay's announcements usually mean something to do with a poker sort of tournament where he's going to knock out George Groves or something along those lines. Or I suggested Vladimir Klitschko because he's mooted to return to the ring, and maybe those two might have a fight for Derek Chisora's 50th. But I guess Derek has earned a ticket to have another fight. He's earned that right, although there are calls for him to end his career. But he's adamant that he wants to get to the 50th fight, and he's also adamant that the 50th will be his final fight. I hope it is the case, because Derek was quick to U-turn on this being his last dance in the UK and say that he will have another fight in the UK. I just hope he keeps to his promise and he can sail off into the sunset with the riches that he's earned with his, and share it amongst his children and their children's children, and stay in boxing in terms of promotion or a pundit, because Derek is very well liked by many within the community. But he roars on to another victory against an underwhelming Otto Wallin. And Danny's back. Danny, do you feel the same way?
Is this where I stick the boot in?
You can stick the boot in if you want.
Stick the Christian Laboot in. Yeah, I mean, Otto Wallin, and part of this, I've got to be honest, part of this is because I did predict he would win. I predicted he'd win probably on points, maybe a late stoppage. I just thought style-wise he was all wrong for Chisora, and I thought technically he was a better fighter than Chisora. I'm not sure either of those things are untrue, but that may be just covering my own back. Yeah, he was pretty bad. Like, I understood why he didn't perform against Joshua. Joshua came out the blocks quickly, used his jab very effectively, backed Wallin up, and he was very cautious about coming into range because he knew that he'd get tagged with Joshua's backhand. And so he kind of took him out of the game. And whenever Wallin's been asked since about the Joshua fight, what did you do wrong? What have you learned from it? The main message he's given is, well, Joshua was just very good on that night. And I think that's fair enough. That's humble, that's honest. But in this case, Chisora didn't do anything different from what he always does. And that's no discredit to him. What he does very well. We saw, 2 or 3 rounds against Usyk where he did it incredibly well, for example, although that was a few years ago. He came forward, he threw big winging punches, overhand rights, left hooks, body shots. Some of them light, some of them heavy, mixing it up, and then balled his opponent against the ropes, leaned on a bit, just generally made life uncomfortable. And we've seen him do it against a certain level of opposition that have a similar style to Wallin. David Price, who tried to keep it long, and a few others. But in this case, having seen Wallin go out to Turkey and be a kind of adopted home fighter in Gassiev, and the fight he gave Fury as well, I don't know if it's a case of Chisora just intimidated him from the start with his style, or if the Otto Wallin that we've seen produce the goods in the past just isn't there anymore. He's suffered a lot from inactivity as well. But he didn't throw the jab anywhere near enough, which against the pressure fighter, a bobber and a weaver like Chisora is key, doubling up, tripling up the jab. And when he did use the jab, it was quite light. He never varied the pace. He never varied the positioning of the jab. He didn't jab to the body very often. I mean, I'm not trying to bury the guy here, jokes aside, but you've got to do something. And again, this is like I said earlier about when the fight's not going your way, changing it up. 6 rounds in, he hadn't won a round. And he was getting beaten up. He was getting pushed back. He was getting belaboured to the body, and he was getting heavy punches shipped to the head. And there was never, and I didn't see enough of his corner work on the feed to say who or what they were telling him to do. But I never really saw much from him. Never really used the backhand to any great degree. He was moving well and he was getting out of Chisora's way. But then as he got tired, he was just moving back in straight lines and inviting Chisora onto him because he was too tired to do anything else. That could have been avoided by better work in the first half of the fight. And now it's more whether he couldn't or he wouldn't. And we don't know. And he'll have to think about that. But Josh Hart messaged me just after that fight finished on Saturday night and said, I can't see any, and I'm paraphrasing, I can't see anyone giving Wallin a big fight again. And I think that's fair enough. You know, he made a lot of ground off the Fury fight. You know, he gave Fury a very tough fight. And as someone pointed out in the chat, he only won a couple of rounds, really. But because he cut Fury and it was a mauling fight, it made it look closer than it was. And he made his name off of that and eventually got another big fight, or relatively big fight, against Gassiev and then against Joshua. And against Joshua, he wasn't really in the fight at all. And you can accept that because of Joshua's status, particularly at the time, and the way he approached that fight. But against someone like Chisora, who, and no disrespect, I think Chisora's great. You know, he's had a great career, and I hope he wins his 50th fight and sails off into the sunset. It's still got plenty of money, I hope, as well. But Chisora is not a top 10 heavyweight in 2025. He's, you know, fringe of it. He's a gatekeeper. He's a very good gatekeeper, and he'll beat people outside the top 10 on many occasions. He'll upset the apple cart. But Otto Wallin, if he's got any business being the fighter who wants to challenge for a world title and wants to be up there with the Furies and people like that, you can't be not only losing to Chisora, but getting absolutely dominated by him at the age Chisora is now. You know, we've seen, you know, people we wouldn't consider amazing talents either defeat Chisora or at least give him a hard fight. And that's back when Chisora was nearer to his prime as well. So, yeah, I don't want to take too much away from Chisora, but I was very disappointed with Otto Wallin's performance.